Okay, I'm here. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Okay, so this is an interactive training session, but I have a deck because structure is fun, apparently. So let me know when you can see it. You should be able to see
Yeah.
it. Okay, cool. All right, so this is, I'm kind of coining this term a little bit. It's no longer analytics, it's digital interface data collection.
Nice.
And the reason for that is GA4 is mainly just to collect the data. The interface for reporting is shit. Getting the insights from machine learning it's getting better. But the objective of GA4 is to collect data that you can use, collect usable data. So just a quick agenda. So we can talk about Google. What is GA4? If you haven't heard about it, you're in the right channel. Good and the bad, the event model, tracking measurement plans, web tracking, app tracking, reporting, which is the biggest part of this thing, and then data integrity, and then some questions. Cool. So this is the current landscape. This I stole out of another deck that I did for Furry. There are 48, no, more than 48 now, web and analytics tools. Google is just one of them. So it stands to reason that GA4 took a big risk by changing, but it's not going anywhere. It's Google, firstly. There's legacy. They've got a lot of legacy. They're pushing the auto migration, meaning if you have a universal code on the site, if you don't do anything on the 1st of July, you will have a version of GA4 with page views. So if you come across a client that has a GA4 property and has page view stuff, it might be that nothing actually happened. It was automatically done for them and they didn't know. When they log in into the interface, they will have the GA4 property and the GA3 property. GA3 properties data will stop collecting on the 30th of June this year, so in less than 90 days, less than 60 days. The data will be available in platform until next year, July. So if a client has GA3 and they're using it for something, they will have access to that data. No new data will be created, only GA4. Papa.
Is there any way to export the data that's collected to, if you want to store it for longer?
Short answer, yes. You do need to upgrade to 360 though. So if you want to do a mass upload, a mass export, you would need to have the BigQuery connector, which only comes with Universal Analytics 360. I did have a small conversation with Google yesterday, funny enough, about this. And if you sign up for GA360 in the next 20 days until the end of May, you can still get Universal 360. In June, they're not going to be selling it to anybody, and they're not going to be facilitating the upgrade. So if you do need to get your Universal out, that would be the best time to do it in the next 20 days, unfortunately. The cool thing with GA4 is that it does have a lot of premium features. So obviously, it's still got your Google Ads integration for search and display. It does have a free native connected to DV360 as well as BigQuery. So those functions on its own is making it still a very attractive proposition for customers to stay on GA4. The new event model is pretty good, to be honest, once I've actually played with it and actually given it a lot of thought. The cloud integration is available. Machine learning is built in, so there are functions that work. Some of them don't work. Some of them, the threshold is very high, so some of our small clients won't ever reach it. For example, to get predictive modeling on conversions, you need 1,000 conversions in a 30-day window. So there are ways around it, like using a proxy event to pick up whether a user actually will convert or not. So what I mean by that is if instead of doing sale as your final conversion, you're trying to predict, use something like leads, if a client gets enough leads. You do obviously need good data to make good decisions. So that's just something to bear in mind. Single view of a custom is actually very possible still with a user ID. It is a lot, it's very similar to how GA3 did it. But you do get a very nice user view in GA4 when you have a user ID. And then GTM. So the fact that this is
Sheldon, and then the single view of a customer you can do over app as well.
Yes, cross-device.
Like
Cross-device.
Nobody can really do that.
Yes, no one else. Everyone else struggled with that.
Yeah.
And then GTM, obviously, it is a Google product, so using Google's tech with Google's tech is the best thing to do. Okay, any questions, comments so far? I'm flying through this so we can get to the chunky
so
piece.
what Sheldon is talking about here is like him, me, and Danae have been investigating this stuff in the last 3 weeks. It wasn't like, he's like spitballing this stuff. This is like the outcome of 3 weeks worth of research.
Yeah. So
can I just ask
go for it.
Sorry, Sheldon. I've seen quite a bit of conversation around people obviously saying how shit GA4 is. But, when you pull it together like this, it makes sense. And I've seen people saying, there are other tools to use and just kind of drop GA4. But when you put it like this to go, you've got the integration with Google Ads, you're saying the event tracking's good, GTM, the single views possible. It sounds like it's not like a write-off, and like you're looking at it now holistically, that even though kind of the interface is not great, it's not a tool to write off.
100% accurate. 100% accurate.
That is exactly where we ended up. I threw an absolute easy fit after not getting certified for Google Analytics, and after calming down and looking at the data, it was like it's still like an incredible collection tool.
I'm glad that's catching on.
Sheldon, with the predictive audiences, did you say 1,000 within 30 days?
Yeah, that is the requirement. So the cool thing is, Papa, I see your hand. It's 1,000 positives and 1,000 negatives, which is pretty cool. So you can have predictive models for users that will not convert, which is actually pretty interesting. Papa, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, compared to the tracking implementation on Google Analytics, whatever the previous version was called, the UAC, how much easier is it to implement? Because like I've got a lot of clients that are saying we want to migrate to Google Analytics 4, but we don't want to pay for someone to do it.
So it depends on how granular and how specific you want to be. To be honest, the page view, if it's there's two big problems. The first problem is how complicated is your website. If it's standard HTML pages, super easy. You just chuck in a tag into GTM and it'll work. You'll get page views. You'll actually get quite a lot. You get enhanced tracking, which includes outbound clicks, scroll tracking, PDF downloads, form submissions. All of those come automatically, provided it's a standard site. If it's a complicated site like a custom HTML or jQuery site, then you do run into a little bit of problems, and that's where you need specific implementation. If they want to go quite granular and they want to know which form was submitted, what specific PDF it was, or something like that, or if a form was, if a newsletter was subscribed and stuff like that, that all requires individual events that you need to specify in Tag Manager. So, short answer, it's not difficult. Long answer is if you want in-depth analysis and in-depth tracking, you do need to put in a bit of work.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
If a client has GTM already installed, it's actually not that difficult to migrate to GA4 because the trigger on the site, the trigger in GTM, you just need to add a new GA4 tag to it. You can reuse your triggers, and that's the cool part about using GTM. Cool. So what is GA4? Just a really quick thing, and I think this is actually very useful. It's obviously the next phase. It's data based on events or interactions. It's got a heavy app tracking influence. So the way Firebase tracks is how GA4 tracks, because GA4 is basically just Firebase for web. That's essentially what it is. I've got this here at the bottom, just so that you guys have a reference point. Urchin was the original version of Analytics. You will never find this. If you find this, I will probably pay you to find a website that's using this. GA.js is the old version of Analytics code. Then there's Analytics.js, which is quite common these days if a client is not using GTM. But the version that you should find, which was launched in 2020, is gtag.js. So what that means is if you go to a website and you look in the code, if they aren't running GTM, you will find one of these two versions, Analytics.js or gtag. This will tell you which version they have. This Analytics.js will stop working on the 30th of June. Cool. So I wrote this down because I figured this is actually the best way to summarize it. Pippa?
Sorry, just on the G tag, if they've got the gtag.js, does that automatically become Google Analytics 4, or do we have to put in a new one?
You do have to put in a new one, yeah.
Okay, cool.
If a client, majority of the clients are going to have GA3, and on the 30th of June, they're going to be very upset that it's not working. The statement I made earlier about the migration on the automatic migration, it is going to happen, but how much it collects on the analytics.js code is still to be seen. So if they have this version, they'll probably get majority of what GA4 can offer automatically. This version, I'm not so sure, because this is a configuration you have to do in platform to say link to this code. But then they do actually just ask you to switch the code anyway.
Okay, cool.
Cool. So I made the statement. Original Analytics was built for marketers and then acquired. Original Analytics was built for marketers and then acquired by Google. GA4 was built for developers and given to marketers. So this is very important because the conversation that dropped GA4, it doesn't work. It's because it was built for something else. Universal was built to prove that media worked. So you spend money, you got people to the site, let's track that. GA4 was not built for that. GA4 was built to see that your website wasn't breaking or that your app wasn't breaking. And then they just built the integrations on top of it. So it is a very different thing. And I feel like I'm drinking the Kool-Aid about GA4, but it's actually not that bad. So the event model is pretty good. You get lots of automatic tracking. So I'm just going to skim through this. There's lots of customization. There's integration to your main platforms. The BigQuery Export is a huge plus. It does have app and web tracking, so cross-device. And then true user ID across devices if you set it up correctly. And they are still building new features. So it has slowed down recently, but there are new features coming soon. Then the new event model does require a change of mindset. So what I've realized in the past 2 months of working with this is that people still refer to page views. And page views was the standard for 10 years. But a page view is now an event called page view. But you still need to use that term of it's a page view. We're going to track your pages, but we're just using an event to track it. So just not to scare people. The other bad stuff is obviously the quotas, which I know everybody knows about. And then there's a big push, obviously, for the use of cloud and the paying of storage and whatever. This I do think was a shitty move that they did. They should have increased the storage limit. But anyway, and then all the current features are at 100%. I am currently in the middle of an attribution issue where if a user clicks on an ad, GA4 says that it's an organic link, but GA3 actually picks up that it was a paid traffic. So it's something I'm picking up, like that's actually what I'm dealing with at the moment. And then app tracking requires dev work. So we've gotten so accustomed to web tracking being done via GTM. App tracking requires dev, which means that you have to go through dev cycles and all that crap. Cool. Any questions, comments so far? Okay, happy.
Cool.
So the event model is any interaction is an event. So there's no longer something called category action label. It is just event with parameters. The parameters can be set at an event level, meaning every interaction you can update it, or at a user level, where the primary function of that is to segment your users into audiences. If you set a user level parameter, the same with GA3, it will not update until you specify it again. So what that means is if a user lands on the website and you say that they are a dog person, they will stay a dog person until you change that. And if you change it to cat person, it will then be cat person for as long as you do that. If you create an audience based on that segment variable, so if you had an audience of dog people, the user will then be moved from one to the other. They will not move back. So that's just something to bear in mind, because I've picked up that if you adjust your naming conventions on your variables, you need to recreate your audiences to recapture all the users. Cool. And then there's less aggregation. So it's more focused on actions and events, meaning every event can be sent to analytics and you can get that granular reporting. And any event could be a conversion. This is really cool. So Google does specify a list of events that you should use, things like generate lead, page view, download, for example. You can then also have clicked on a specific button as a conversion. You can specify that. You can tick it as a conversion, which is really nice. Making an event a conversion is just the flicking of a switch, which I will show you just now. And then this is the coolest thing I think that GA4 offers, is you can create your own event. So let's say you have a page view where the parameter on the event name is page view, and the user viewed a specific page. So say you had a thank you page. You could then put the parameter of that event or as page path, and then put the URL of thank-u in my example, and you can create a new event in the system. So GA4 will receive a page view event with the parameter of the page path being thank you, and then create another event in the system called conversion or thank you page or whatever it is. The nice thing with this is, because you are trying to get to that 1,000 events in 30 days, you can manipulate the system if you wanted to. You do have to do it at your own peril. You can screw this up quite easily, because I have personally done it, where I did not put the regex in correctly, so every event got duplicated, and then I stopped myself and then had to calm down. So it's really useful, it's really powerful, and it is pretty cool. You can also copy the parameters from the source event. So if you send an event to the system to say Sheldon is a dog person or user X is a dog person, and then you want to create a conversion saying dog person, you can then copy whatever you want from that first event. You can choose to modify them as well. Quite a cool feature. Okay, I'm just doing this so everybody has the same thought processes. GA4 360, there are limits again. So 25 event parameters per event, 25 user properties per property. So that's basically 25. And then you can have 50 custom dimensions per property and 50 custom metrics. I don't think anyone's ever used 50 custom metrics in their lives, but you do get those limits. The limits are increased for GA4 360. And then here is the infamous API tokens. You can see that it's 10 times higher. So if you build a dashboard with GA4, you get 25,000 tokens per day, where you can literally reach it in an hour, which is actually very frustrating. Then your data retention, this is super important for everybody. If you have a GA4 property, by default, you have data collection, data retention for 2 months. You need to make a change in the settings to change it to 14 months. It's only up to 14 months. And what actually happens, I've seen it, is after 14 months, data starts getting deleted. So the big part of this is obviously to push for BigQuery, so you could start exporting your data. With the BigQuery export, it can only go forward. You cannot connect to BigQuery on a standard GA4 property and get a look-back export. If you have 360, though, you do. It's up to 13 months, I think. It's not actually here on this list. Okay, cool. Then tracking and measurement plan. So this has become very, very important, is because of the event model, everything outside of a page view needs to be specified. You need to say, I want to track this button, or I want to track this form. I want to know that a user reached this specific depth on a page. There is scroll tracking, but I don't actually like it. So whatever you want whatever you want to track off a user, you need to do manually. And then there is also something that you need to remember is, do you need to track the click on a button, or do you need to track when the page loads? So something that I'm picking up with just the new versions of websites is there isn't a thank you page, it's a thank you pop-up. So you then need to specify that the pop-up is visible or the pop-up occurred, or do you just click on the submit button, track the clicking on the submit button? It's up to you what you do, but you do need to specify that in GTM. Okay, so this is actually what I do for a living now. I draw pictures, so I drew one for this. This is the general flow of how you will be using GA4. You have your website, you have your app, you need to run it through your measurement plan. That measurement plan will inform what event tags or event code needs to be done in Firebase for apps and GTM for website. You then send your events via web to a data stream or app to an app data stream. It then gets combined in the GA4 platform. You then have 3 options. You have the reporting interface, you have explorations, and you have Looker Studio. Looker Studio can be sourced from data extracts or SQL queries from the BigQuery project that you have linked. Does anybody have any questions on this? Does it make sense to everybody?
Nice graph.
Thank you. Thank you. Cool. So I spoke about data streams. You can have multiple data streams for the same thing. So you can have multiple web, multiple iOS, multiple Android data streams. Ideally, it should just be one of each. If there are multiples, you then need to start filtering them when you pull reports. Because if you have a staging and a live analytics data stream, if you pull a report on how many users appeared on your platform, it will be both live and staging. So it will inflate your numbers, and it's something you obviously don't want to do. Then, like I mentioned, the data retention settings. So 26, 38, and 50 months is only available for 360. You need to change it from a 2-month default. Otherwise, after 2 months, you will not have any data in your platform. Cool. So I mentioned the enhanced measurement. This is the automatic tracking you can switch on and off if you want. So it scrolls, outbound clicks, site search, form interaction, video engagement, and file downloads. The video engagement does require the user to be, or the client to be using an embedded YouTube video player. It does say JS API support, which is basically just the YouTube player. I have seen the Vimeo one work, but it's not as reliable as the YouTube one. Cool. And then real measurement. So what you actually want to do, and this is out of the Strauss GTM, is all the different events you want to specify. You need to create a specific trigger for it. Ideally, you want to become really good friends with the web developer so that they can give you a data layer push. So that's what that is. That's a custom event, meaning when the form is successfully submitted or when a user does something that you want, and it can be confirmed by the backend, you do a data layer push and then base your trigger off that. The reason why I highly recommend doing that is if you use something like a element selector, a CSS selector, if they make a minor change, your tracking will break, and then it will not be a fun time and you'll need to figure it out. Whereas the data layer push doesn't generally change. Cool. Then app tracking is done via Firebase. You have to install an SDK into the app to make sure that Firebase can communicate outwards. You then also need to specify the events that you want to track. So when a SDK is installed, you do get a bunch of things automatically, things like first open session, app update on Android, and uninstall on Android as well. But if you want anything else, and screen view, sorry. Screen view is automatically tracked, provided it's a standard screen view, meaning when the content inside the app changes, that will then be counted as a screen view. If it's anything else, you do need to specify events via the developers, and each platform has its own code. So iOS has its own, web has its own, so iOS, Android, and web. And then if they are using things like Flutter, and there's other platforms that are available, there's a link in this deck that you can access to show you how to do things. So this is what they will actually need to do. They need to log an event. It's actually quite granular. And then they need to specify the individual parameters that go along with that event. Not a fun time. But if you've done this part, you'll know what exactly to do. Okay. Then reporting interfaces. So the two big interfaces are obviously the interface, so the GA4 interface and the Explore section. I'm going to go into them now. But does anybody have any questions so far? Cool. I'll take silence.
All good.
All good. All good. All good.
Cool. So this is the GA4 interface. Just reloading it just so that it doesn't do anything stupid. This is the dashboard, which is customizable. You can edit it here on the side. Where is it? No, you can't. It shows you your general metrics. I honestly don't ever use this. I just generally go straight into the reports. In the same way that GA3 had the acquisition behavior, conversions, and audience, we've got the same thing here on the side. Your reports will always be based on events and users, one or the two. That is the scope of analytics. There is no longer sessions in the traditional sense. You can report on sessions if you really wanted to, but GA4 is trying to blur that line where if you have a user ID set up correctly, the user moving between desktop app back to desktop back to app should be seen as the same session because it's just engagements from the user, interactions from the user, not necessarily the 30-minute window we used to focus on before. Okay, then acquisition, obviously showing you where your traffic comes from. If you need to use this, you can go a little deeper. So there's two different things. There's user acquisition and traffic acquisition. So user acquisition is the first place users come from, meaning every time a new user lands on, every time a cookie is created on the site, depending however the user got there, that would be that user's traffic source. It is the first user interaction. You then get traffic acquisition, which is if the person comes back to the site, how did they come back to the site? You'll see that there is session. This is a virtual session in inverted commas. I'm still not entirely sure if they're going to keep this. They did push it into the system. I don't like it, but this is how you report on sessions in the old way. Then you get something called engaged sessions, which is if a user does not bounce and they do something on the site, meaning they scroll. And then there's average engagement time per session, which I'm sure everybody understands. And then engaged sessions per user, so obviously you want this to be as high as possible, is users returning to the site multiple times. Does any questions so far? I'm getting to the chunky one right now. Okay, happiness.
Oh, good.
Oh, so just for reference, the problem I'm having at the moment is in my user acquisition report. So you guys might have the same problem, is when you use this default channel grouping, which you cannot edit any, by the way, this default channel grouping, my traffic from paid traffic, my traffic from paid media is being seen as organic. And in GA4, in GA3, it's being seen as paid. So it's a problem that I'm trying to still figure out. Cool. Then engagement. Engagement is anything that a user does. It will be either an event or a sub-event, which is a view. So because we still use page views and screen views as a very big metric, you get the special report here called pages and screens, which is essentially just the pullout of your pages, your page view and your screen view events in a single report. So here's our events. There's page view. It is an event. And then at the bottom here, if I add enough columns, enough rows, there's screen views. So page views is 411, and this is 10,000. Go here. It doesn't. Because of course it wouldn't work while I'm trying to show people what it does. This number is supposed to be those two put together. But 411 is clearly more than that. Really selling the platform here. Okay, so everything we specify in GTM or via code gets sent as events. It then gets reported in this section here. You get this event called user engagement for free. It does not influence any reports or exports or costs. It is a free event that GA4 does. It is there and it fires apparently every 5 seconds in the background to make sure that the user is engaged. They don't use bounce rate in the same sense anymore. They use engagement, and that's what this event is. So, hypothetical situation: user clicks on an ad, lands on your website. If it is their first visit, they will be deemed paid traffic. So in the user acquisition, there will be paid traffic. Their traffic acquisition, when they started that session, will also be paid. If the user leaves without doing anything, if they were on the site for long enough for the user engagement event to fire, they will not be deemed a bounce. If they come back from wherever, so if it's direct, their traffic acquisition will be direct, the user acquisition will still be paid, and you'll get another page view. If they continue to do things on the site, so if they scroll, for example, you'll get this engaged session. When it loads. I'm still getting used to this report. This engage session number goes up.
Yeah, I
That's
must say I've started using that. It's way better than a bounce rate.
Yeah, it is. Because bounce rate could have been influenced by any other tracking that you've done. Engagement is actually quite nice. It's a positive rather than a negative.
Yes.
Then events, like I mentioned, any event can be a conversion. So you have a conversions report, which is a subset of your events. When you, Frank?
Sorry, I'm still on the previous thing that you mentioned. I don't know if you know this, but you can create a new channel grouping now. Yeah, did you? Yeah, and then you can obviously edit your channel groupings from there, but I haven't used it. I saw it recently. It's obviously very new.
The last time
it's correct. I used it recently, like last week.
If you go to data settings, there under data settings, it's there.
Yay! Okay.
Yeah. Great.
Something new that's amazing. Thank you, Frank.
Yeah, cool beans.
That is cool. Okay, so scratch my previous statement. You can edit it now, or you can create a new one. Under events, you have a list of all your events that come through into the system. You can modify your events, so you can then choose a data stream, and you can create a new one. So this is what I'm showing you. Is you have to give it a name. So if you wanted to call it thank you page, you could call it thank you page. You then put the parameter name for event name. So when the event name equals something, and then you can add conditions. So if your host name or something, or whatever the parameter is that you want, so there's a nice population. So if a user does something specific, so reaches the thank you page, you can then create a new event.
But Sheldon, isn't it better to create the events in Tag Manager?
100% is, except we don't always get access to Tag Manager.
True.
So it's a nice.
But Sheldon, we live in a perfect world. What's the problem?
We do, Freddie. So yeah, ideally you would want to do it there. So one of the things we've been talking about is, when I say we, at my anyway, what we want to do is we want to use this modify event when a user fills out. So we've got multiple products. So we've got one thank you for all the products. So we're basing it on the product code for that thank you. So if you reach thank you and your product code is product A, we're making a new event called thank you product A, so that we can report on those events on its own without needing to add parameters to our reporting. So that's the use case that I'm actually enjoying with it. Then, if you have an event that you want to mark as a conversion, you just literally flick the switch and then it adds it to your conversions report. So let's go here, reports, checking the gun there. Conversions. And then you have your list of conversions. On this specific report, you then can see your total revenue. So if you are sending a event with a revenue amount, you then get to see it in the specific report. Then pages and screens, like I mentioned earlier, it is all your screen view and page view events put together, but reported on a slightly different way. This is something I needed to deal with at some point, which I'm going to share with everybody, is if you look at this list, there's only 4 things that you can do here. So you can report on page title and screen class. So that's web and app. Page path and screen class. So web and app here, page title and screen name. And the reason why this is interesting is if your app mirrors your website. So let's look at Takealot's website. They could use the name or the page title. So let's just say it's an iPhone. The page title could be iPhone 14, and screen name in the app would need to match it. The problem that comes is that screen name generally, and this is just working with developers, they try to use generic names. They try not to go too granular on this, which means this needs to be a dynamic name as well. So if you want your reporting to be clean, if there is parity between your app and your web, you need to align these 2 things. So either page title and screen class, page path and screen class, page title and screen name. What we've decided is to use page title and screen name just because page path gets very granular and screen class doesn't get as granular in the app. So it is something you'll need to evaluate based on a client. Maybe page title and screen class will work, but it is just something to be aware of on how the client's website is structured. And then content group, I'm actually not sure how this works yet. Then landing pages, obviously just the first page that users start their journeys on. It is pages. So an interesting thing is to be aware of the naming conventions. Pages does refer to web, not app, which refers to screens. Then there's monetization. So if you have e-commerce or any sort of ad revenue, so this is really cool feature that not many people have, is ad revenues for publishers, and obviously e-commerce is purchase and purchase revenue. So you can report on both. Your total purchases if a user, so it's user-based, completes a purchase, and then first-time purchases just excludes repeats.
Well, Sheldon. So a few months ago, like the e-commerce tracking for J4 wasn't ready. Is it ready now?
Yes, it is a different data model. So that's actually a very good question. So let me just show it to you. It went from it's now item focused. So that's how this change happened. So before it used to be, I actually can't even remember what it used to be, but this is the new code that you need to use. And your price it used to be revenue, now it's price. And then the other thing is, there's something else that changed drastically. Oh, it's no longer e-commerce purchase, it's just called purchase. So they adjusted the naming to be a little cleaner, and that was the big change. And I mean, I think Frank will know how much changes we had to do for e-commerce tracking back in the day. Okay, cool. So I'm just conscious of time. This is your reporting interfaces. Demographics, I'm sad to say that it's not as useful in this process here. Just because you can't really go deeper. You can click here, but it's not as fun, to be honest. So I'm going to skip into the explorations interface. So there are a bunch of templates, which are really cool. The only thing that I don't like is when you use a template, or if you click on any of these, it pre-populates the US data, which is very frustrating. So I'm just going to go through what all of these are. Freeform is a table. Funnel exploration is just you specify the steps and then you can do that. Path exploration is really cool, and a function that I really like using is you can specify an event that you want to start on, and it will show you what events happen next. This is what's the word? Being too granular in your event reporting will affect how quality your report exploration looks. Because it is event to event, if you have page view and scroll, you may end up not enjoying what your path exploration looks like, because you'll have page view and scroll where they one-to-one, which then just adds a stage in your reporting. So it's just something to be aware of the path exploration. Segment overlap is if you build audiences, you can then look at them in different, you can just find where your overlap is. User Explorer is really cool. It does rely on a working user ID. If you do it without using user ID, it will use something called a pseudo user ID, which is your cookie on web and your Android advertising ID on Android. iOS is not included in here. So it's just something to be aware of. Cohort just shows you how long users stay on your website based on a specific value. And then user lifetime. So if you are using like revenue and stuff like that, you can then report on them here. I'm going to start with a blank one. Cool. So something that's really interesting is you can only go back 93 days in this report. That's as far back as you can go. Now it's giving me 6 months. But anyway, Papa?
Which do you think is better to use for just general dashboards, this Explorer or Looker?
It's a very loaded question. I would say Explore if you're going to be actively using it. Looker Studio if you are just sharing it with someone or you want to create a report that you share once in a while. The problem with Looker is the quota issue.
Yeah.
It will screw you over very quickly. So if you're doing it for like your monthly reporting and you're only going to pull it once and then export it, then Looker. But if you want to understand your data and actually do some analysis, I actually really like this Explore section.
So with Explorer, can we still integrate our Facebook data and our LinkedIn data?
No, unfortunately not. This is strictly GA4 data.
Okay, cool.
You can't choose the data source here.
Damn, cool.
Cool. So if you ever built a report in GA3, there's dimensions and metrics. So dimensions how you slice the data, metrics is what you're measuring. You have to import, so that's what this little plus is. You need to import the specific things. The interesting part about this is kind of like how you build a query in BigQuery, is you need to know what you want to find before you're doing it. So if you wanted to know what your device breakdown is, you need to scroll, since I'm scrolling. It is cool that you can hover over it, so it'll give you an example of what might come. So I'm going to do a really quick one of device category. So you can add it to a row or a column. This is flipping frustrating. And then because there's nothing that's being measured, it'll tell you that nothing is available. So you then need to add a metric. You can use the search function at the top. So user, it'll then figure out all you want. This is something really interesting to scroll through just to know what all of them are. I'm going to go with total users and then add it as a value. This is now just really fancy pivot tables. What I would recommend doing also is doing data streams. It's actually just called stream. So you do that, and then you can do that as a column. So if you ever use a pivot table, that's what essentially this is. So just adding columns and rows. And this is really interesting to see the difference between your data streams. So if you are doing like iOS and Android, if you ever see something where it's iOS traffic and Android, something's broken. So it is something I've done just to check. I did not see anything broken, but I have seen someone put a post up about it. Here's your Strauss website. And this is also where the stream name comes in handy. You specify the stream name when you connect them to GA4. So try to be as descriptive as possible. As far as I know, you cannot update them. So in data streams, we've got our web data stream. Oh, you can change it now. This used to be locked before. Scratch that. You can edit it. And then the nice thing is that your recent exploration will be stored in that list. It's always a good idea to give it a name if you wanted to. So now you have this information. What's really cool is you can right-click on any of these cells inside the table and say include only selection or exclude them. If you include them, it will add it as a filter down here. So because I use two different, it's technically got two different dimensions. Both of them were added. So there's device category exactly matches desktop and stream name exactly matches Strauss out. If you wanted to remove it, you could then do that. And then it will then filter accordingly. Any questions? This is just a pivot table. It's a fancy pivot table.
It is a pivot table. But you need to understand what the dimensions and the rows and the metrics are, which is quite tricky.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly user friendly. So like for Elena, for Full Circle, did we end up building a few of these for them?
No, not yet. Francois is going to be working on that.
Okay.
So there are nice visualizations in here where you can add, like this is quite cool. One of the things that I have done is, let me show you this quickly. This was a nice use case. Traffic. That one. So I did this for Strauss, one of their visualizations, and the breakdown was session size. works. Because the machine learning part is actually built in, you'll see there's this anomaly thing that'll highlight that these were higher. So if you read in the pop-up, you'll see that it says that it's higher than expected. So it was expecting 1,000 users, but it actually got 1.9 thousand. So these are really nice. I mean, it's pretty cool to include.
Yeah, that is cool.
You can also increase your date range. So how much data it will use before giving you a estimate. If you take out your breakdown, this is really cool. So if you want high sensitivity, it will decrease this
like
range.
It's like it's doing regression.
Yeah, essentially. It is essentially regression.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which is a cool function built in. Scatter plot, obviously, you then need to have your breakdowns and your data. Bar chart is standard. Users, and then if you want to break it down by just it work. There we go. And then geomap. So the thing I like about the geomap is that it auto adds these things for you. So city, region, country, subcontinent, just because you then don't need to go in and pull them out. But the nice thing is that when you add something to here, it stays. You do need to remove them once you're done. So if you wanted to swap something out, you just, if you want to remove one, you just click the X.
So the stuff on the left-hand side, it's you basically just priming. It was almost like you're preloading them, and then when you have to then choose to move them into a row or column, right? Is that
100%?
Okay.
The nice thing is
confused about this thing. I don't know why. Like I just really struggle with this report.
To be honest with you, I did too. It's just the problem with reporting. A problem with reporting interfaces is you need to have a question that you need an answer for before using the reporting interface makes sense.
Yeah, but sometimes I don't have a question, Sheldon.
That's where the anomaly detection comes in handy for you.
Yeah, but it only tells me the anomalies when I've loaded a report, which I don't know what the question is.
Where to start? Fair enough.
Now you would still have jobs. You would work with me in McDonald's.
There we go. So I want to show this path exploration, just because it is something I find very interesting. And once it loads, it's something really cool to see. So here's your session start event. Your session start event leads majority to a page view. Then there's session start again, meaning so there's that many users that start a session, have one page view, and then leave. And then start another session, meaning they come back. A quick tip is if you need to get a bigger canvas, you can make those smaller. You just hide them with that little minimize button. And then the one that is the best is you can start with an endpoint. So if you have a bid submit or a thank you page.
Yeah, this is your favorite one.
This is my favorite one. It then shows you in reverse what people do. So there's add to cart. You go back. If you click on it, it highlights it and expands.
But Sheldon, just show them that page view. If you change the event name there at the top to the actual URL, the type by page path at the bottom, you can actually. It's similar to that behavior report in Google Analytics 3. So at least then you can then it's not just events. It changes it into
usable information.
Yeah, usable information, which I like.
So there's page path. And then you can go quite granular if you wanted to. It is super slow because it is querying BigQuery's database essentially. So you can go as far back until you get to one user, which is quite cool. It's also very nice to show someone, to say these are the things. What I would love them to have done, which I'm not sure if they have, is the ability to filter out events. And by that I mean, if you don't want scrolls, if you don't want a user doing a specific action.
Yeah, because it gets very busy quite quickly.
Yes, 100%. And then let's just do a user explorer. So app instance ID is the advertising ID which I'm surprised is showing here iOS, but let's just do this one. So when you have your user explorer, it gives you a list of all your users. Your user activity is one specific user. And then you can, that's a great example. This person removed the app. Let's just do one and see what happens. So there's your screen view. And then the nice thing is you can actually get quite granular here to see it was mobile, it was a 13 Pro. If you have any specified user properties, this user did not log in. That's why they don't have an SEC. And then any event parameters that they fired, you will then see here. You can load more. No, didn't load more. And then there's app update, session start. And then if a person has purchased stuff, there used to be a thing. Oh, transactions. There's that. It then tells you how much that user has spent and how many times they've bought from you, which is quite nice. And segment overlap. So if you built audiences, so I know there's 1 minute left. If you have segments or audiences that you've built, you can then overlap them to see how well you can see how much they overlap. The one that I thought was really cool was our device category. So how many people from iOS versus Android visit a specific page, specifically the Connect page on the FMB website. That was pretty cool. So you could then build to see, which is an interesting thing to look at. Okay, I had a couple more slides. Let me just go through them quickly. Pippa, to answer your question, that is the difficulty. Analytics, then Sheets, then Query. Sheets becomes very useful if you need to do multiple times to get around your quota. Then your BigQuery Export. So you do get a sandbox account for free that has 10 gigs of data and 1 terabyte of processing every month. The problem with the sandbox is that your expiration is set to 60 days, meaning any data that's stored there will only last for 60 days. If you wanted to go longer than that, you need to create a billing account and link a credit card. The BigQuery Export is a one-to-one, so one GA4 property to one BigQuery project. You can get around the project thing if you just reset it up. There is the option of a streaming or an intraday table, which is really nice. It is very quick, but it is not governed by any SLA. It's called the best effort report, meaning if your data doesn't appear within seconds, you can't actually complain to Google. They will tell you that it's best effort. Then, like I mentioned, your table expiration set to 60 days unless you change it. Then in GA4, you can configure what gets exported to BigQuery, meaning you can specify a specific event. So if you don't want your scroll events to go through, if you don't want any generic event that's not actually going to be useful in a year's time, you can not include it, which then decreases your storage costs over time. This is the query export schema. It's just something to read. That's what your daily tables look like if you've never seen it. So you have a data set in analytics, you have a daily table, and then you have a table selector. You can export this data to Sheets from here, but you then only get that one table. If you want to do it over time, you need to create a query with the data range selector in it so that you can use Data Studio's data range selector if you're going to be using that. Then it's also very important to be very specific in BigQuery when you're running your query. So if you had to do a select all, which is just the star, on that specific day, it was 217 megs, which is 0.2 gigs, which means you could reach your terabyte quite quickly. Whereas if you just wanted your event names, it then runs 2 megabytes a day. So that calculator here in the corner will become one of your best friends.
Sheldon,
Hi.
Sheldon, how many slides do you have left?
Like 5.
Okay.
Sorry. Better queries. So if you are going to be exporting, just make sure that they're efficient queries, because if you create a query and it's a long query, your Data Studio will take even longer to run. This is what it looks like if you do an automatic export. You can then use the data variables, like I mentioned. If you do want to do this, it's actually quite cool. I'll show it to you. And then this is just an example. So Strauss's data tables is around 50 megs a day, which means in the free version of 10 gigs of storage, they have about 200 days worth of storage. So you can get your clients on there quite quickly for free and then show them the value and then upsell them, something really cool. A terabyte of data on the Strauss dashboard that we have, a terabyte for a month would be 20,000 refreshes for the whole month, 600 times a day. This is why they want you to get around the code system by using BigQuery. There is a calculator. An extra terabyte of processing a month is $2. And then this is the questions from the team. How do you double check? So the freeform report, I'll get next slide. How do you double check the data is accurate? There is this little icon, which is very important to check when you are building. So it's this here. It will say thresholding applied, generally, meaning your certain things won't be shown to you, because if they show it to you, you'd be able to determine which user it is. But this is the one that matters. So if it says based on 100% of available data, where the threshold hasn't been applied, that means this report is accurate. Then what is the most accurate way to implement event tracking? Is a measurement plan. And then are we still dependent on UTMs? Yes, you are.
Papa.
Yes.
Yeah, on that threshold issue, if it's flagging that it's threshold, how do you get it to unsampled? What can you do to change it?
You need more data.
Okay.
So basically, if you get 10 users coming to your website, it won't report on those 10 users. You need to reach a minimum before it will then aggregate it, so it's anonymized data.
Do you know what that minimum is?
No, I haven't actually seen anyone say what it is, but they just say you need a minimum amount of data.
Helpful.
So the last time for GA3, if we used that, it was 100 users.
Okay. Thanks.
Then tips for freeforms. It's basically a pivot table. Understand what you're measuring, so use your measurement plan. Import your metrics, then your dimensions, then your parameters, and then apply your filter. If you do it the other way around, it will be very slow. If you're using high cardinality, meaning there's a lot of different versions, use rows. If you're sorting and splitting, use columns, and then apply filters last. And if in doubt, call me.
Thanks, Sheldon.
Thanks, Sheldon.
You're welcome, guys.
I just stop the recording now. Stop recording. Stop recording.